Welcome to the Honest Mamas podcast, where we talk about the emotional and spiritual aspects of the motherhood journey. We are a team of honest mamas. Myself, Melissa, Sophie, and Claire. We are psychotherapists, moms, and friends. Join us as we get real about the topics that matter to you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 37 of the Honest Mamas podcast. This is Melissa, and today I had the absolute joy of speaking with Geneen Roth about her new book. Geneen is the author of 10 books, including the just-released This Messy, Magnificent Life and the New York Times bestseller When Food is Love, Lost and Found, and Women, Food, and God, as well as The Craggy Hole in My Heart and The Cat Who Fixed It. She has been teaching groundbreaking workshops and retreats for over 30 years and has appeared on numerous national shows, including The Oprah Winfrey Show, 2020, The Today Show, Good Morning America, and The View. Today we talk about how to be way, way, way more present in your life and therefore create more joy. Here's my conversation with Geneen Roth. Geneen, thank you so much for being here today.
I'm glad to be here with you.
I have to name that in regards to reading your book, I just finished This Messy, Magnificent Life, your new one that you just came out with. And in honor of Honest Mamas podcast, I have to be honest that my crazy aunts in the attic have been chattering away most of the morning saying, okay, don't screw this up. Make sure it's really good, on and on and on. And so I know today we'll talk about what that actually means, what the crazy aunts are. But just to land a little bit for myself and for listeners, this is a really big honor for me to be able to have a conversation with you today. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you.
You're more than welcome. So why don't we dive in? For our listeners hearing about you for the first time, perhaps, how did you get on the path of working with women around food and also in writing the book, The Messy, Magnificent Life?
I started with food because I was crazed and living in a hell realm in terms of my relationship with food and my body and the self-loathing that I felt towards myself. And I had tried so many things to get out of it, mostly believing that if I lost weight, I would be happy, that since it seemed like that was the cause of my suffering, if I took the cause of my suffering away or the apparent cause of my suffering away, then what would be left would be happiness. And I couldn't ever do that. I tried for many years, almost 20 years, to do that the regular ways, dieting and willpower and depriving myself and keeping to a pretty strict food plan. But all that happened was that I felt worse and worse about myself. So I stopped doing that and started becoming curious about what my relationship with food and my relationship to my body actually was expressing for me. What was the inside of that? I never was interested in it. I just wanted to fix it and get rid of it. And so that was really a change for me. That was when I wrote my first book, Feeding the Hungry Heart. And then I started working with other women after I understood that the way out of this was through it, and looking at understanding that our relationship to food is a reflection and an expression of our relationship to life itself, and that it also expresses our core beliefs about being alive. And unless we touch and name those, the relationship with food and body weight might be healed, but those core beliefs about deprivation and shame and punishment and what we really deserve will express themselves in other ways. So I wanted to get to the bottom of it.
Got it. I love this quote that you write in your new book. I'm just going to read it quickly. We intuitively understand that we want something we cannot see or touch, but we don't know how to name or access it. And so we fall back into believing that being thinner will right everything that is wrong. The only problem is that it's based on a lie.
Yes, right.
So true. So true. And I think about our listeners, our audience, which are, either new mothers or mothers on the motherhood journey. And I know for myself, I'm a mom of 2 young boys. A woman's relationship to body and food can be complicated before you even have a child. And then, bringing a child into the world, which can feel completely out of control, can also trigger, if you weren't struggling before in the same way, it can activate a lot of those cycles of turning to food for comfort or turning to food to, feel bad about ourselves. And add that to the movement of getting your body back after having a child and all the ads that we see, the celebrities that we see on the front covers of, magazines. It can feel like a lot for a new mom to kind of sit with all of this that gets activated during this time.
Right. Yes, I can hear that.
Yeah. And I'm just curious, for you, what you might say to new moms out there that are feeling the chaoticness of this time of being a new mother and that really are struggling with the shame that happens around their body. And, you said so many things in this book and so many other places that I've heard you speak or talk that really resonate with me. And the 2 that I wanted just to focus on in this moment was that you believe dieting doesn't work. And the second piece is that women have issues with boundaries, both of which I absolutely agree. And I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit more to those.
Well, one thing is that issues with boundaries are not the same for new moms because really with new moms, there are no boundaries. I mean, you're feeding your child from your body. And so there's a merging that happens with first the child is inside of you, growing inside of you, and then the child is right at your breast. And so mothers and children are a different situation in terms of boundaries. In this messy, magnificent life, I do talk about boundaries. I do say that many women don't understand, don't believe that their bodies are theirs, not because of having had children and sharing their bodies with their child, but because of internalizing the culture's view of women's bodies, the objectification of it, being touched when we haven't wanted to be touched, being leered at, being seen as, I said it before, an object. And so many women don't believe that saying no and or I don't want to are allowed. We just don't feel like we're allowed to take care of ourselves in that way. And of course, that doubles with a new mother because there's so much giving that's going on. And I think it's important to say at the outset, I am not a mother, except of my dog and my many books. And I have nephews and nieces and things like that. But I don't want to pretend that I know what it's like to speak as a mother to other mothers. So I'm telling you what I've noticed and observed and what a lot of mothers have said to me rather than speaking from direct experience, which is what I usually do.
Yes.
Speak from direct experience.
Yes. I appreciate the honesty. And I absolutely know that. And I think that what you can provide mothers, is such a gift and a reorienting back towards themselves and back towards their bodies with a level of compassion that maybe they've never even felt before. So that's why, I wanted you on and wanted you speaking to this theme. When you talk around, I guess the part that really resonated with me around women have issues with boundaries, absolutely. In the new motherhood years, when you are breastfeeding, if that is your choice, you absolutely have to kind of give into some of those boundaries with having your child close and breastfeeding and constantly being touched and poked and prodded and laid on and all of that. But I think there is this kind of mentality as mothers, as children grow up and grow older, that, you start putting everybody else ahead of you, including your children. You stop taking care of your body. I know for myself, sometimes my kids will be eating pizza and I'm like, I just got to eat the pizza because I got to give them a bath and run on to the next thing. and I don't take time to slow down and say, okay, if I felt like I had a choice in this moment, would I choose something more, nutritious or more loving for myself? Or in this moment, am I choosing to put somebody else in front of me?
Right. Yes. So it sounds like you're being conscious of making that choice, which is great.
Yes.
Because I think in the end, and I do, despite not having children of my own, get asked a lot of questions, particularly from mothers about their children and not passing on shticks, as I call it,
yes.
with food.
Yes.
How to not pass that on. But what the answer that I think is most core and essential to that question is that your children learn from you by who you are and what you do. You transmit a state, so to speak. You're like a walking radio frequency, walking radio signal. They're picking up the signals all the time. And in that way, it's much more important that you do take care of yourself, that you have boundaries when they're appropriate, that you realize that to the extent that you feel negativity about your body, that will get passed on. That does get passed on, regardless of what you say, that does get passed on. And so it becomes even more important to be kind to your body. In the book, in the chapter called Heavenly Bodies, I say that we're often kinder to our jade plant than we are to our bodies.
Yes.
Yeah. So because we treat ourselves the way we've been treated, and we haven't learned a new set, or we haven't even realized, I think that's the first thing, is realizing that we've internalized how we have been treated, how our bodies have been treated, and we don't understand that another way is possible. We hear that it might be, but we don't really get the extent to which we've internalized the lack of kindness about our bodies, or see the importance vis-a-vis children and how we transmit our state of being, our self-acceptance or lack of it, our body kindness or lack of it onto our kids. That's the most important thing that we can do.
And I see how that ties into, why dieting a lot of the times doesn't work, because you're not really going deeper to what kind of drives the hunger or drives the parts of yourself that shame yourself or make you feel badly.
Right. Yes. Dieting goes on the assumption, most dieting, it depends on the reason why somebody is dieting and the energy behind it. But for the most part, most dieting is based on the belief that somebody else out there knows more than you do, knows more about your body than you do, knows more about what to eat than you do. And it, first of all, puts you still relying on an external source of power. And it's based on the underlying assumption that if you trusted yourself, you'd go crazy with food. You cannot be trusted, therefore you must diet. And that message of who you are at your core cannot be trusted is not a kind message to be giving to yourself.
Or your children.
Or your children.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm thinking about this, Geneen, and maybe you haven't thought about it. Maybe you have. I mean, you've talked to and led so many retreats and met with so many women. As a mother speaking to their children, we'll see a fast food restaurant, for example, and my child will say, not that he would ever eat the food because he's such a picky eater, but he often says, they lure them in with toys and things like that. Like, can we go over there? And I'm trying to sit with what feels like the most loving response so that my children can learn to trust themselves around food. And maybe they're just still young, that I need to still nurture this. But I explain to them, it's not really healthy for our bodies and we can maybe eat it sometimes. But I'm just curious, maybe you have an answer, maybe you don't. But anything you would say around that to guide some of us, trying to guide our children?
I think you all need to be the guides there. I think that really takes on the ground experience that I don't have.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think education and guidance, particularly for young children, is really important. And for them to learn very early what foods, as soon as they can talk and have some kind of awareness, if they eat something and they don't feel so good afterwards, maybe you can say, gee, how do you feel when you eat that? What does it feel like? Do you have more energy to play or less energy to play? Just make it in very, very simple language.
And from a curious stance versus this is a bad and this is a good.
Right. Yeah.
I'm curious about this idea, which also really resonated with me, around treating our bodies with unconscious resentment. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Is that from the chapter, If I Were Gloria Steinem? I'm just trying to figure out in what way, because I talk about that in many different ways.
Yeah. I have it, I think for me, I have some notes in the back of the book and just talking about, I guess the unconscious resentment for me, I'll speak from my experience. What resonated with me was that there are ways in which subconsciously, unconsciously, I think for some of us that we feel like we need to punish ourselves, and our bodies become receptacles for those punishments. For example, if I'm eating something that I know is not healthy, but it's sort of like, to hell with it. Who gives a care anyway? I'm just going to do this thing. For me, there does seem to be sometimes some anger and resentment behind some of the choices that I've made in the past. And obviously reading your books and kind of opening up my mind in these ways has made me more curious and open and present with all of these voices, which I'd love to also talk about the ghost children and the aunt in the attic. But, anything more you want to say about that?
Well, that goes back to what we were talking about before, the kindness piece, about turning towards yourself rather than away from yourself. And it can't really be understated or overstated enough that we live in a culture which does not, for the most part, respect women's bodies.
Yes.
And so we have internalized those messages, and they've been going on for so long that we don't even realize the extent to which the culture is distorted about that. And so we internalize it, and we have body shame and body resentment and body loathing for having women's bodies. And so if you understand that we live in a mad culture, that what's insane is considered normal, and that the fact that we've internalized the messages, both silent messages and verbal messages of the culture, is very important to know, because when you realize that you are now treating your body the way the culture has represented women's bodies to be treated, then you can start questioning that.
Yes.
The fact that you're doing that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it feels to me, this book, to me, I love what you've said in the book, and I've heard you say many times, it takes a crisis, to wake people up sometimes. And what I found fascinating in learning more about you is that you've gone through some significant, big challenges in your life, and it's just made me, really read this book with such curiosity, and also seeing such grace in which you've been front lines, feet on the ground, walking the walk, going through these things that you don't just write about from a detached place, but you've actually been through.
Right. Yeah. For me, it's really important to experience, live through, resolve directly before I write about it. Otherwise, it doesn't really make sense to me. I write because writing for me is a way that I know what I know that I don't realize I know. But I have to know it first before writing about it. And before knowing it, I have to experience it. And so this book, This Messy, Magnificent Life, each chapter is about a circumstance, sometimes a catastrophe that I have experienced that seemed like it was unworkable, that seemed like anybody would have just given up if this had happened, or I would have definitely given up. And so it's about developing another kind of relationship, seeing things from an entirely different orientation and perspective than the usual, which is, oh, this is too much. I can't stand this. This is overwhelming. So it's really a book in which I turn experiences upside down, and like being sick for 4 months or breaking my back in an accident. I also talk about losing all of our money and what that was like, about not sleeping and, spending many nights not sleeping. And so or my marriage, as I call it, to negativity, and what that has been like, the judgment and blame that I have lived with. So that, as a friend of mine says, he wakes up with a sense that something's wrong and who's to blame. And I feel like I was doing that a lot as well. So it's like, almost, I would say, it's a book about believing you've hit an iceberg. You're the Titanic, and you've hit an iceberg, and there's no turning this ship around. And this is a book about how to turn the ship around, or yourself around, in any situation whatsoever.
Beautiful. Beautifully said. And this idea, what we've sort of been alluding to or talking a little bit about, the crazy aunt in the attic and the ghost children. And I just want to read this quick excerpt, just a line that talks about the aunt. And you say, the bully aunt seemingly comes to the rescue by telling you what you should or could have done to avoid feeling this way now. Who cannot resonate with that?
Right. Yes. And what I say in that chapter is how important it is to know that everybody's got this voice in the head. It's in place. It's a developmental structure. And everybody's got it by the time they're 4 years old. And so there are many, many names for it. I call it in this book the crazy aunt in the attic. Other people call it the superego, the inner critic, the judge, the inner parent. It's a coagulation, sometimes a composite, of many authority figures. What's important to know, though, is that we all have one, and that most of us are merged with it. Most of us believe what this crazy aunt or uncle is telling us, that we're not good enough, we're worthless, we should have never tried something new, or we're terrible mothers, or we did that wrong and we should have done it that way, and if only we had done it that way, then we wouldn't be feeling this way, just as you just read those lines from the book. So I think when you know, throughout the book, I take a basic stance that seeing something, and in this case, the workings of this voice in the head, is much of the way to freeing yourself from it. Most of us believe that we have to try so hard, work so hard to free ourselves, to change that orientation to negativity, to stop listening to the crazy aunt. But that's another way this insane culture has hypnotized us into believing that we're not good enough, and we're not enough the way we are. And if only we embark on the great self-improvement project, then we'll get there. But what I say in the first chapter in the prologue of the book is that that's not true. That is also a lie. And we have not learned to pay attention to what's right. So we're coming from a place of constantly feeling like we're wrong and need to fix ourselves. And I call that the project of me. But what happens when we become aware of that as well as the propensity towards negativity, the crazy aunt in the attic, the fact that we treat our bodies with shame and judgment and self-loathing. When we become aware, and this is all part of the piece of fixing ourselves, when we become aware that there are absolutely things to do, practices that take a couple of minutes a day, that's it, not 30 years of therapy, not long meditation retreats, a couple of minutes a day to redirect your attention, to turn towards yourself with kindness, to take some breaths, to live in your own two shoes, as I say, to stop listening to that crazy aunt in the attic. All these are very, very simple things to do and can be done in a few minutes a day.
And it feels such the antithesis of how, I mean, I know for myself that, you know, if you're striving to lose that 10 pounds or the baby weight, or if this would just change, or if my child would stop crying, or if I could just make this much money, you know, then life would be X, Y, or Z. And what I've realized, and this is not going to be new to you, but there's always something. There's always some other benchmark or some other milestone that we convince ourselves that we have to hit in order to feel peace and happiness now in this moment. Would you agree?
Yes. In fact, I'm just writing a piece about that, and I'll read you a couple of lines.
Great.
There isn't a someday, there never was. No one has ever been to the future that you keep putting your life on hold for. All we ever have is now. And if you continually put your life on hold for what it will be like tomorrow or next year, or when you finally lose that weight, you won't recognize that you already have what you want, because you will have spent years training yourself to want, not have. Imagine what you could do, I often ask a group of women, if you stop turning your energy against yourself and use it instead to question what you've been hypnotized into believing about the size of your body, and to speak up for what matters to you and your children.
Oh, beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So before we end, I would love to also just touch on the ghost children, seeming I've mentioned it a lot in this podcast. I feel like I have to give our listeners just a taste of what that is, because I think even just naming, you know, the crazy aunt in the attic, that voice that we can all resonate with, allows us to be more conscious of it when it's happening. And I think it would help a lot of the listeners to also hear a little bit about the ghost children. And if you feel comfortable jumping in to explain what that is, that would be fantastic.
Well, there is an entire chapter about the ghost children in the book called Be Kind to the Ghost Children. And so that gives that subject a lot more time, and it deserves more time than we have in the next 3 minutes. But I will say a line about that so that people understand that each of us has old, undigested, based on early memory parts of ourselves that are stuck in the past, and that really also could use our attention, could use our kindness. And when we are ruled by them, they're reactive. They interpret a situation based on pain and based on old painful memories. They put a wash of pain over almost anything. And so it's good, like with the crazy aunt, to be aware of them, often to name them, to at least know that you're being run in the moment by the part of you that felt abandoned, or felt rejected, or felt like you weren't good enough, or felt like you didn't belong. I talk about how one of my main ghost children parts is the little match girl, the old myth about the little match girl, of the little girl standing out barefoot in the snow with rags on, looking at a picture-perfect family on the other side of a big window in little velvet dresses, roasting turkeys and getting kissed by their parents, and feeling that there's a circle of warmth and belonging that I will never belong to. And that can come up for me in any number of situations. And for a long time, I believed the story of it. When it gets triggered, then I would go down the rabbit hole of, oh, I'll never belong. It's just the way it is. I was born without that DNA, or something's wrong with me, and that's why I'll never belong. Now when it comes up, I notice, oh, there you are. You've come up again. And I understand that that's part of what gets triggered, and I accept it. I'm kind to it, just as we talked about, and it moves on.
So beautiful. So beautiful, and such a deep inquiry to be with, to slow down, to be more present. It really, I cannot thank you enough for being here today, Geneen. And I hope that all of our listeners not only, will take a look and read your books that you've written in the past, but also this new one, This Messy, Magnificent Life. And I know that you're offering a super exciting masterclass that's free if you buy a book. Can you tell our listeners what that's about?
Yes, offering a masterclass, a video masterclass called Women, Weight, and Power, Releasing the Energy of Obsession. And that will be offered in very soon, actually. So the sooner the better. And you can get it for free if you send us the receipt of your book.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I know. It's great. I'm very, very excited about offering this.
That's wonderful.
Because I realized as I wrote and then read a couple of minutes ago that women have so much energy and power bound up in judging and shaming their bodies. And I feel like now is the moment, now is the time to release that energy, to release that power, to be able to affect what's going on in the world now. And if not the world, if you don't feel like your work is to affect other people in the world, then your family, and that's enough, because the ripples will go from you to them and widening circles.
Very true.
Yeah.
And so they go to geneenrothbook.com. Is that correct? To send in the receipts?
That's where all the information is. Yep.
Wonderful. And we'll have that in our show notes as well for those listeners that are in the car, can't drive and write, which we don't encourage. It'll be there for you. Well, thank you, Geneen. It was a total blessing to have you on today. I'm so grateful.
Melissa, it's really been a pleasure for me as well. I'm just so happy to talk to you and those of you who I might not get to talk to any other way, to a group of mothers or women who are in the mothering process. I love that you've made this available and accessible to me, and therefore to the people who might be affected by it. So it's me who should thank you, Melissa. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. Today was a dream for me to be able to interview Geneen. She's had an influence over my life from when I first read her book, Women, Food, and God. Don't forget to buy her new book, which is also fantastic, at geneenrothbook.com, and you'll get a free bonus masterclass. That's pretty awesome. And if you like this podcast, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. To get our show notes, go to honestmamas.com/episode-37 and join our Facebook community at facebook.com/honestmamascommunity, where these conversations and way more will continue.